Now, there is a specific group that exists within every ERG that we do need to discuss as a niche, a subgroup of every ERG, and that's the allies. Now, for this conversation, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have to be because it's come to this. If your ERG program is currently operating in a way so that there's a private space where allies are not able to join, or even a private space in general where somebody is over admitting them in, and people can potentially be denied into joining this private space. That is illegal, and you have to stop it now. When I tell you all, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but companies are getting sued for this. I don't like to put this out on LinkedIn because the wrong people can see it. But we're in a space here, a safe space. I can tell you all, even recently. Now, if you really know me, you know that I'm not a fan of like ERG softwares. I won't get into that too much today, but anyway, I was at a conference and an ERG software was presenting recently. And with that, someone asked a question. I can't remember what the question was, but the people representing the software said, well, you can always make a private space just for identifying members of your community. And with that, somebody literally stood up during the event and said, actually, that's illegal. We just went through this whole legal thing at our company for this exact reason. Don't do it. That's the thing. Right now, there are some probably well-intentioned people that are kind of pushing this separate space thing. Again, illegal. And you're putting your entire ERG program in jeopardy when you do that. It only takes one person to get upset, one person to say, I feel discriminated against, that I can't be part of this. And it's really the key problem is not the problem, but the key thing to consider here is that the ERGs are company sponsored. So with company money, you cannot make a space where only certain people can join. That's what it comes down to. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have to say that. Now, with that, I know the question that comes up a lot. Well, how are we supposed to maintain psychological safety if they have to be in our group? What's the solution then? And that's the thing. They do have to be there. You can't tell them no. So how do you meet in the middle? This is where I give an illustration. I've learned that there's different types of people who travel. There's the people who like the tourist traps, and then there's also the people who like the behind the scenes local culture. Just let me know in the chat. Put a one if you're a tourist trap person. Put a two if you like to see the real of a space, the local culture, and immerse yourselves in it. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a tourist trap person, so I'm doing the bus tours and things like that. But even then, a couple of things I will say I've observed when you do go kind of behind the scenes and see the local culture of it all. Thing one is that when you're immersing yourself in another culture, you might be kind of feeling out of your element, even especially as they do kind of like demonstrations that you might not be familiar with. You might be like, what's going on? I don't really know how I'm supposed to show up here in this moment. I experienced this earlier this year when I went to Africa. I went to Zanzibar, and with that, there is a tribe called the Maasai tribe, and they do like this jumping ceremony, and it's like 30 minutes long. It's kind of long, but with that, I really didn't know how to show up in that space, and maybe it's just because I feel I'm just like a naturally awkward person. If you've met me in person, you might know that. So with that, I'm like, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do in this exact moment while this demonstration is happening. And oftentimes, this is how allies feel when they join our space. Like they join and they want to learn more. They want to immerse themselves in our culture, whatever it may be with our communities, but they just don't know how to show up, and it's uncomfortable. So oftentimes, the answer as an ally is just to be a wallflower, just to not do anything, or even sometimes on the opposite end, allies might overstep. Um, and most of the time, they're well intentioned. I do like to say most of the time people only show up in a way that they feel is natural for them to show up. So for instance, back when I was a Black ERG leader during the Black Lives Matter movement, we held a lot of listening sessions. We called them decompression sessions, where we were just kind of talking about what was happening during that time, a lot of high emotions. And with those events, there were a lot of allies who joined those calls. Well-intentioned, but some of them talk the entire time. At the time, for me, I was like, shouldn't you know that this is not the time for you to be talking? But at the same time, here's the thing. If someone is naturally a talkative person, if that's how they view showing up as talking, they're only going to do what they feel like is normal. And again, they're well-intentioned. It's not saying that that's good, but they just don't know how else to show up. Again, for me, with my awkwardness, if that happens to me, I'm probably just going to be quiet and just be like in the corner because I don't know how else to show up. Now, I say that to say, how do you solve for this? How do we keep the ally, the well-intentioned ally, from overstepping, from making the space uncomfortable for our members? That is where a guide comes in. Just like when you're a tourist, having a guide who talks you through what's happening, how to show up, get some context on what's happening right here, what you should and shouldn't say. Is this a time to speak? Now, when I say this for ERGs, I'm not talking about a literal person. I'm talking about a document, an allyship guide document. This is something that you only have to create one time too. So I know I hear this a lot from ERG leaders. It's not my job to educate the allies. I get it. I get it. With that, don't view it as educating the allies. View this as you are, again, protecting the psychological safety of your community, because allies will overstep, whether intentional or not, if you don't outline what it means to show up. So in that case, for me, hosting those listening sessions, I have to come to terms with the fact that I never actually outlined, here's what it means to show up in this space right now, and what that means. And then you can't be upset when people show up in different ways that you may not have wanted. And that's why it has to be documented. A number of things could be included in an allyship guide, such as good terminology to know, important dates to know, some good resources to know, even questions to ask and not to ask. So for instance, for the LGBTQ community, you can have, how to ask about your pronouns. On the opposite end, for the Black community, you can have questions not to ask. Don't ask to touch my hair. Still things that to us might seem obvious. Allies should know this when they join our space. But honestly, a lot of allies who join the spaces, this is early in their allyship journey. Not always, but sometimes for allies, it's early in their allyship journey. So they're just starting to really know, or to be interested in learning how to show up better for this community. So they might be more prone to making mistakes that you feel are obvious. But that's why it's so important just to outline this again, one time in a document. You can use your next leads call to do this, or 1 hour. You all just kind of crowdsource all these things together. As a matter of fact, spoiler alert, there's an allyship guide within the ERG Champs community that you can use as a template. So that's part of it. Having a guide helps to protect the psychological safety of your community. On the other hand, this is also very important because there are some ERGs right now that are so focused on allies, overly focused on allies. Let me take it back a notch. Sometimes you'll notice, if you're a tourist trap person like me, which is kind of ironic that I am, but sometimes when you go to these tourist traps, you'll see that the local people sometimes are not able to be themselves really, because they're trying to like tweak themselves to fit, to be more palatable to tourists, if you will. So they're not even able to show up as they normally would. Similarly, with an ERG, I see this sometimes where we're doing programming that is for allies. Even sometimes as the majority of our programming, I see this sometimes where it's geared towards allies. And then even so, our space is a space where our members are not able to be themselves because we're having to change the culture of our space to be more palatable to allies. And that's why I say, on the other hand, don't let your ERG become a tourist trap. When I say that, I really mean, just like the people who really like to immerse themselves in the culture when they travel, it's the same thing for allies. When they join our spaces, it's almost like they're trying to immerse themselves into whatever our community's culture is. And with that, there has to be a culture that they're immersing themselves in. It cannot be this watered down programming, this watered down version, because then they're not immersing themselves in anything. We have to have programming that is for our communities. It cannot be a case where we're just having an ERG where we talk a lot about our community. People shouldn't feel like this is a space where they're talking about insert community. They're not really doing things for us. That's when it becomes problematic. So Just like we're keeping in mind allies have to be part of the space, but at the same time, we want to make it a space so that allies are learning by immersing themselves in the community. Not that they're learning because we're doing all this programming that's geared directly at them. When I tell you, there's so much allyship programming, or even to the point where it's almost like ERGs are paying for allyship training, even sometimes as the majority of their budget. I'll give an illustration of that shortly, but again, our spaces should be for the community that we're hoping to serve. It should really be providing resources and providing connection points for them and allies we can't keep them out. So they're learning by immersing themselves in the community, just like people who like to really immerse themselves, even as a tourist.